Your floor feels freezing in January even with socks on, and you've been told there's insulation under there, so why is it still that cold? Here's the thing. I've crawled under houses where the fiberglass was technically there, and the floor still felt like ice. Insulation on paper and insulation in real life are two different things. Hanging loose, compressed, cut wrong around plumbing and electrical, missing whole sections, and most homeowners never know because most homeowners never go under their house. But here's what I really want you to understand. The insulation may not even be the whole problem. You got heat moving through your floor, air moving through gaps you probably don't know are there, exposed floor joists, a crawl space that's connected to the outdoors, and possibly ductwork losing energy underneath your house. So in this video, I'm going to show you how your crawl space is actually affecting the comfort and energy efficiency of your home, why insulation by itself may not fix it, and what you need to look at instead. So let's start with the floor, because that's where most people notice this first. You're standing in your kitchen in January, socks on, and the floor feels freezing. The floor isn't making cold. What's happening is heat is moving from the warmer part of your house toward the colder crawl space underneath it. That's called conduction. Heat moves from warm toward cold as long as there's a temperature difference. So if your living room is 70 degrees and your crawl space is 45, heat is going to keep moving through that floor assembly toward the colder crawl space. And here's something I always try to explain to homeowners. Even after you fix the crawl space, your floor probably isn't going to feel warm unless you've got something like radiant floor heat installed. The surface of your feet is warmer than the floor, so your body is still giving up heat to it. What we're trying to do is make the floor warmer, not make it feel like a heated floor. In the winter, if we can raise that floor surface temperature from, say, a low 50 to 60 degrees into a range closer to your thermostat setting, your feet are losing heat to it at a much slower pace. When you are able to do this, the room feels more comfortable even though the floor itself isn't actually warm. Now you'd think, well, I've got insulation under there, so I should be fine. But having insulation and having insulation that's actually performing the way it's supposed to are two different things. Fiberglass only works the way it's supposed to when it's installed correctly. If it's hanging loose because there aren't enough insulation supports, failing because of moisture from high humidity or a plumbing leak, compressed, cut badly around plumbing or electrical lines, or missing in sections, the real performance can be a lot lower than what it says on the label. I see this constantly. A floor that's insulated and a floor that's performing the way it's supposed to are not the same thing. And most homeowners have no idea because homeowners never go in their crawl space. And even if every piece of fiberglass is installed perfectly, there's still another path for heat to move through, and that's the floor joists themselves. The fiberglass is installed between the joists, but the wood framing is still exposed to the crawl space. Wood has some insulating value, but not nearly as much as a cavity filled with insulation. If your floor joists are 16 inches on center, the joists themselves represent roughly 9% of the repeating floor area. And that's before we even count beams, blocking, double joists, or other framing. So on a 1,000 square foot floor, you're talking about roughly 90 square feet of wood framing where you don't have the full R value of that fiberglass bat. That's called thermal bridging. But insulation slowing down heat is only half the story. The other half is air movement, and that's convection. You've got plumbing penetrations, electrical penetrations, duct boots, gaps in the subfloor, and leakage around the rim joists and the sill plate. All of those can become pathways for air to move. And that rim joist is a big one. Air leaking around the rim joist doesn't necessarily just stay in the crawl space. Depending on how the house is framed, that air can move into wall cavities and work its way upward through the house, coming out around baseboards, electrical outlets, and other openings. That's part of the stack effect. Warm air rises and escapes higher in the house. and that creates pressure that pulls replacement air in lower in the building. If the crawl space and the framing around it are leaky, some of that replacement air can come through the crawl space and lower walls before eventually making its way into the living space. So now you've got two completely different ways you're losing energy through the floor system. You've got conduction, which is heat moving through the materials, and convection, which is heat being carried by moving air. And there's an indoor air quality side to this too. If air can move from the crawl space through those same openings into the house, moisture, odors, and whatever else is in the crawl space air can potentially move with it. So air sealing isn't only an energy issue, it's also about controlling where the air inside your home is actually coming from. Now here's where the crawl space itself becomes the biggest variable. Is it vented or is it sealed and insulated? With a vented crawl space, you've intentionally opened that space to the outdoors. In winter, those vents allow cold outside air to influence the temperature underneath your floor. In the summer, especially in humid climates, those same vents can allow hot, moisture-loaded outdoor air into the crawl space. Think about it this way. If I opened several windows in your house in January, nobody would be surprised when the house got colder. Crawl space vents are doing the same basic thing underneath your floor. You're creating intentional openings between the space and the outdoors. When we seal those vents, now we've stopped that direct air pathway. If we seal them with something like rigid foam board, we're not only stopping air movement, we're also adding insulation to that opening. Then when we insulate the foundation walls, we're moving the thermal boundary from underneath the floor down to the perimeter of the crawl space. The foundation wall itself gives you some resistance to heat flow, but concrete block and poured concrete still conducts heat. So insulating those walls gives you a much better thermal break. That's why a properly sealed, insulated, and moisture-controlled crawl space behaves much more like a small basement than an outdoor space under your house. And where you put the insulation depends on which crawl space system you're using. If you've got a traditional vented crawl space, the floor above the crawl space is your thermal boundary, so that's where the insulation needs to be. In a sealed crawl space, you have more options. You can still insulate the floor assembly if you want to, or you can move the thermal boundary to the foundation walls by insulating the perimeter, or you could do both. That's the approach we normally prefer because now you're bringing the crawl space inside the thermal envelope instead of trying to isolate it from the house above. Real quick, if you want to walk through your own crawl space and actually see where you stand on all of this, I put together a free resource called the Crawl Space Air Seal and Insulate Guide. It walks you through what to look for step by step. Link is in the description. Now let's talk about something most homeowners never even think about until I show it to them. And honestly, it might be one of the biggest energy problems in the whole crawl space: your ductwork. There are actually two ways your ducts can waste energy in a crawl space. The first is leakage. You've already paid to heat or cool that air, and if the connections, boots, or joints are leaking, some of that conditioned air never reaches the room. The second is conduction. Even if that duct were perfectly airtight, if it's carrying warm air through a cold crawl space in January, heat is still trying to move through the duct wall toward the colder crawl space. Same thing in reverse during the summer. That's why ducts outside the conditioned space need to be both sealed and properly insulated. Sealing handles the air leakage, insulation slows down the conductive heat transfer. So even when you've got ductwork running through an unconditioned crawl space, you're not just dealing with one problem. You can be leaking conditioned air out of the system and losing heat through the duct itself all at the same time. That means your HVAC system has to work harder just to deliver the temperature you already paid for. The last piece of the crawl space is the ground, and this one gets misunderstood a lot. A vapor barrier is not insulation. Putting plastic over the dirt doesn't give the ground some big R value and stop conductive heat from moving through it. What the vapor barrier is mainly doing is slowing water vapor from moving out of the soil and into the crawl space air. And when that vapor barrier is properly sealed at the seams and around the perimeter, it can also become part of an air control system. So I don't want you to think that vapor barrier itself is what's making the crawl space warmer. It's helping us control moisture and air movement from the soil. Then the air sealing and insulation at the walls or floor assembly are what handle the bigger thermal side of the equation. If you're a homeowner and you want to better understand how your home works before you spend money trying to fix it, make sure you subscribe to the channel. So when you put all of this together, you've already got 4 things you're trying to control under the house: heat, air movement, moisture, and the HVAC system. If you've got a vented crawl space, the floor assembly is doing most of the work separating your house from the outside environment, so it needs to be properly air sealed and insulated. If you've got a sealed crawl space, you're moving those control layers toward the perimeter. Seal the vents and other outside air leaks, insulate the foundation walls or whichever thermal boundary you're using, properly seal the ground vapor barrier, control the humidity, and make sure the ductwork is sealed and insulated. That's how these pieces work together. You don't just throw fiberglass underneath the floor and assume you've fixed an energy problem. You have to know where the air barrier is, where the thermal boundary is, where the moisture is coming from, and know your HVAC system is interacting with all of it. I've got a playlist on the screen that walks you through many of the crawl space problems homeowners face and how to solve them. I'd encourage you to watch that one next. I'm Michael Church with Crawl Space Ninja. I hope you make it a happy and blessed day, and I'll see you later.